Well, some of them have gone into great detail, like Jerry Stone. If you want detail on every aspect of an Apollo mission, he's done presentations on that.
Yeah.
And he can parrot every step of the way that NASA has done. He does it perfectly. If you want all of the information that NASA is going to provide, he can give it to you. And he doesn't question any of it.
Yeah.
And he is probably the best of the parrots out there, with the exception of the fact that he presents to adults.
Yeah.
Most of the other ones present to students and very young students. And I have a problem with that, influencing them in that direction. If you're an adult, you can listen to him, but you can also listen to us and make up your own mind. When you take somebody like Barrett, and he goes in there and he actually tells the children what kind of idiots we are, don't listen to us. He's directing them. And he does it openly. He does it on his website.
Yeah, he does.
And yet, he won't sit down and discuss it with me. He stopped discussing it with you because he realizes he's in a losing situation.
Yes.
Right? But he simply runs away from me because I just have to put that one picture in front of him, that soaking wet flag, and he's gone.
Yeah. Peter Bassett won't correspond with me at all now. I sent him what I thought was a very reasonable critique of his book, or the first quarter of it, and asked him for his comments. Yeah. If I made a mistake, I'm sure he'd have told me. I haven't heard a word, so I assume I'm correct.
I still can't imagine that a man that looks through a telescope can claim that there's a diffusion of light through space. I mean, that's just unbelievable. Diffusion of light happens through an atmosphere, not in space.
Of course it does.
He claims the other because of that Apollo 12, the sunlight in the NVIDIA image that they reproduced. They reproduced the diffusion of light, which proves it was taken on Earth. Even though they're trying to show with their highly technical computer simulation, it's almost as good as a photocopy of what they were doing, taking that picture.
It was good.
Yeah, which was good that way. And they were so concentrated on reproducing the light in the reflection off the surface that they had to jump it up. But they completely forgot, there's the sun, there's the diffusion of light, and it shouldn't be there. Yeah. But they had to reproduce it the same as the photograph showed.
Yeah, which they failed to do because the hatch, which in the photograph, as you've shown, is so dark you can't see anything.
Yeah.
And just for avoidance of doubt, NVIDIA did invite me to take part in that program. But when they said I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement with conditions attached, I refused. Because they could have kept me quiet for many years after that. It was done as a piece of publicity for their Maxwell GPU, which is fair enough, you know, if you're going to use a bit of publicity, but at least get your facts right. Because they said that it was Neil Armstrong's spacesuit which provided the additional illumination. No, it wasn't. It wasn't big enough. There certainly wasn't enough reflection off the lunar surface, which has the reflectivity of a road surface, to provide it either. So they faked it. There's a lot around NASA which is faked, which is what's so sad about it, because people actually want to believe that NASA have done what they claim to have done, i.e. fly man to the moon. I watched it live. I mean, a dwindling band of people who actually did sit there and watch that particular transmission on July the 20th, 1969, of man landing on the moon. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. What an achievement. I had no reason to disbelieve it until I started looking at it.
None of us did.
No.
We were brought into the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And some of us got back out.
NASA had to be seen to succeed. There's no way they could have failed. It was a political event. It wasn't anything to do with science or anything like that. When John Kennedy said we'll land a man on the moon before the decade is out, it was a political statement.
It wanted to prove that the U.S. was superior to any other country in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
And they still make that claim today. And when you question NASA and their capabilities, you're questioning their claim that they are a superior nation at the same time. And that's when they really take offense to it.
Yeah.
They can't separate the two.
Yeah. And what is so sad is that by maintaining this fiction of Apollo, they will not only fail to repeat anything close to it, they will also bring America into disrepute. Most people will be perfectly willing to say, okay, it was a political event, you had to do it, it's a brilliantly executed propaganda exercise, which succeeded, you demonstrated the superiority of American technology, great, no problem with that at all, but don't maintain a fiction that you landed men on the moon, because you didn't.
Right, the other part of it is that they get a pretty good budget, and they actually make money. I've seen figures, I've looked it up, and for every dollar that the government puts into NASA, they're getting $10 back.
Yeah, could well be.
And or more. And people say, how do you do that? Well, they've got the buildings, they're leasing them out to like SpaceX and all kinds of stuff like that, right? And Blue Origin are one of their biggest guys leasing that property out. But they have museums in every state. And you're getting like, the one in Houston's getting like 1.5 million people a month going through the place.
Yeah.
I mean, they're making money. That's why they took Orion and put it in the museum so people could go see it. Because it makes them money.
But Orion's supposed to go to the moon. What's he doing in a museum? Because he didn't work.
Right. It's their version, like if you have a YouTube channel now and you can monetize it and make money off of it, you're going to keep doing it because once the video's out there, people can just watch it and do it. So they put, Orion in a museum and say, there it is, go see it. Everybody that walks through the door, they're getting their money back. Right? So they are making money off of that thing for its 4 hours and 24-minute flight.
Yep.
That's, and it could just be a shell sitting there. I'm sure they have reproductions of it in other museums because they got at least 50 museums that they got to put it in, right? One in every state. So that's what they're doing with it. That's quite the incentive.
Well,
even though NASA hasn't done anything in a decade to keep it alive. And people don't seem to get that. NASA's not doing anything. Okay, they probably working with Boeing to develop better commercial aircraft because they got the facilities to do all the jet engine testing and fuels and different, create different stuff. And they've got the employees to do that as well. And they're probably working with General Motors because that's also now a government-owned operation. They're probably working on battery technology as well for it.
Oh, but they worked on that right at the beginning because they had the lunar rover.
If they're going to claim to be in space, they've got to have better batteries out there too, right?
Of course
so
they
they're
do.
going to end up in GM cars, and that's where they're going to end up, right? But they're not doing anything. They're not launching anything. They're not doing anything, and people don't realize after 10 years, why would you quit? Everything's supposed to be advancing, yet they quit. So how's it going to advance?
It's so sad because when Orville and Wilbur Wright flew their first plane at Kitty Hawk, they flew it 4 times in total. The first flight was about the length of a jumbo jet.
Shorter than the wingspan, 10 feet off the ground. I was just looking that up as far as records go. There's another record that was set in 1890 where they got 8 inches off the ground. Well, if you're running down a field and you hit a bump, you could get the 8 inches, right? That's what I call a pissing contest. Somebody said, I'm first, right? Before the Wright brothers, I'm first. I got 8 inches off the ground. Bullshit. Right?
After the Wright brothers had flown, in 1919, Alcott and Brown flew across the Atlantic. That's quite an advance. That's quite an achievement. 3,000 miles across the Atlantic. And then Charles Lindbergh did it solo in 1927. The first passenger jet was flown in 1953, just 50 years after Orville and Wilbur Wright. That was the Comet, built in the UK, I should say. Then the first jet aircraft were flying, as I say, 50 years after the Wright brothers. And then we have the supersonic Concorde that was flying first flight in 1976, but the first tests were done in 1969, around the time of Apollo.
Yep.
Because it wasn't a commercial success, it was a very expensive aircraft, only 16 built. The first rockets were launched by Wernher von Braun, who was a Nazi, by the way, if anybody says he wasn't. He was a Nazi, he had a Nazi party number. If you want to know what it was 5738692. That was Wernher von Braun's Nazi membership number, 1938. So let's have a little less about von Braun was not a Nazi, he was. The first rocket was fired in 1942, the V2 rocket that devastated London. 2,500 of them flew. And then we have all the other rockets, but a lot of them failed. This is what people fail to realize, that a lot of the early rockets, the Redstone rockets, didn't work all that well. They kept collapsing back onto the launch pad. But Apollo had this almost unique record of success. Except for one, it's Apollo 6, it almost shook itself apart. And right through the Apollo moon landing saga, it all worked perfectly. That's not how science works. I mean, 2 shuttles disintegrated, the Challenger and Columbia. That's 2 out of 5. And only 50% of missions sent to Mars were successful. So the idea that Apollo was totally successful 50 odd years ago flies in the face not only of history but of science. But these parrots do not accept that. They have to big up NASA all the time. They have to tell us what wonderful people they are. And somebody even had the ridiculous idea that, well, how could you produce these millions of pages of documents if it was all faked? What a stupid question to ask. They were all totally legitimate.
Most of the data was being collected through simulation.
Yeah, of course it was. It was being documented, so the idea that there was a hoax, because if 400,000 people were going to be told it was a hoax, who was going to tell them, and how were they going to be told?
Henry Ford could have done the same thing in the 1920s. He could sit there and say, oh, I got a car that'll go 400 miles an hour. I got one that'll go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, right? And you say, how do you do that? He'll show you the turbocharger, the superchargers, double overhead cams, electric motor hybrid design. He already had that back then. None of this stuff is new.
No, it's not.
The first engines they built were turbocharged because they had no idea that the engine would actually suck air in.
Yeah.
So they had to blow it in, right? So if you put all the documentation together and say, well, this is the one I did, but it costs a lot of money, so we just built this one that went 30 miles an hour. It had 12 horsepower and goes 30 miles an hour, right? But here's all the designs to go 400 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And exactly those same designs can actually do that today. You don't have to overcome radiation, vacuum, heat, and being totally isolated with a very small amount of consumables to travel any distance.
Yeah.
Like if you build a very fast car, you're going to have to fill the tank up pretty quickly. So when you do that, your consumables go up, and when you're going into space, the consumables go way up.
Yeah, they do.
And that's why rocket technology will not get us anywhere.
No, it can't do. Chemical rockets are so 20th century as to be almost obsolete already, and they're still using them.
Yeah.
I mean, NASA, you would expect, would start working on some more advanced technology to launch themselves into space, but they don't appear to be doing it.
Well, they've come up with the ideas, but they can't make any of them work.
So one has to ask the question, well, did the first ideas work as well as they keep telling us, and their groupies keep telling us?
Well, they don't work today.
No, that's true. But don't forget, there are also academics who are in on this as well. These are the academics who you'd think would be a little bit more informed as to whether they can actually do what NASA claimed. There are people in the UK. There's a Dr. Steve Barrett at the University of Liverpool. There's a Professor Martin Hendry at the University of Glasgow. Dr. Robert Grimes at University of Oxford. Professor Anu Oja, the University of Leicester and the National Space Academy. And there's a venerable institution in the UK called the UK Institute of Physics, who wrote a long article on their website about how Apollo couldn't possibly be faked. But they said such ridiculous things that to be an Institute of Physics, you think, well, they might have done a little bit better than they did. They were challenged on what they said. Trevor Weaver showed what he had written about their article. No answer, no reply. It's as if they're so embarrassed that they got it so badly wrong, they don't dare to admit it. So you've got all these academics, alongside all the media, the people who comment and cut and paste what somebody else said. Oh, there's no stars in the picture, therefore it's all fake. You can't possibly taken photographs with no stars in them. And they show in great detail how that wasn't possible, which is totally correct. You can't get the foreground and the stars in the same photograph on photographic film. This stuff. Photographic film, don't forget. We're not talking digital, we're talking film. And if you can't do it on film, it's not going to show up. So all they're doing is the straw man argument again. They're proving something that they suggested as being the problem. They're not doing it for real. They're just cutting and pasting what somebody else said. And it's getting so boring now because they're using the same excuses. You know, the no stars in the picture, the missing crosshairs, the sea rock, the waving flags, the strange shadow angles.
They're not going to touch the fact of what's going to happen to photographic film when it hits a vacuum and it just is gone.
It is. And have any of these NASA parrots done any of the testing for themselves? No, of course they haven't.
No,
they take what NASA says.
NASA tested the Mylar and put it up on display for you to see.
Exactly. And it disintegrates.
It only takes one little Google search to show you that Mylar and Estar film are the exact polymer. So why would they put that up there? And that's because you've got your second and third generation away from Apollo, and they don't realize when they're posting their study on Mylar, it doesn't cross their mind that that's what's on the outside of that thing that's supposed to be on the moon, and it wouldn't look like that because that Mylar wouldn't be there. Okay, and they wouldn't even consider the fact that the film is the exact same composition of material, that it would do exactly the same. And yet out they are doing this. And that's the same with cold welding when they're on the ISS. Oh, look, we touched this bolt and it stuck to it. When you open the door and create a vacuum inside, and all those beautiful stainless steel switches they had inside of there are going to weld themselves together.
Yeah.
None of them will work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that entire control panel, which isn't even in the photograph,
Yeah.
like it's not there on the model that they're using, but if you had a real machine and did that, it's all gone. And now you come back to the first spacewalk. They opened the door. They had no idea there was cold welding. So it didn't happen. Simple. It might have happened at a very low altitude. You could do that if you got above the Kármán line and you're at 65 miles and you can create an orbit there for a day or two, right? Or even a few orbits.
Yeah.
Right? You could do that. You're not in a hard enough vacuum that it's going to affect. You can use rubber seals. You can do whatever. You're not going to get into cold welding, anything like that, because you're down at a lower torr value there.
Yeah.
You cross that 130 miles, you are in trouble, for sure.
You're in trouble, but they didn't know that they would be in trouble.
No.
So they make up this story of going to the moon where the vacuum levels are vastly greater than anywhere around the Kármán line or even where the ISS is. It is so severe, the vacuum is so hard, there's no way they could survive. Absolutely no way at all. But these NASA parrots insist that they did. Come on, guys, you're scientists, some of you.
They could work out the strength of the structure of the craft itself to be out there.
Yeah.
And how much pressure you can put inside that thing before it blows up, and it's not very much.
No, it's not. Because if you're going to put pressure inside a structure in a vacuum, it's got to be powerful enough to withstand that internal pressure. And we're told the internal pressure of the Apollo craft was, let's say, 5 pounds per square inch internal pressure. That is 2 tons per square meter.
There's 2 problems with that. It's not just the structure. The astronauts, to drop down to 5 psi within 10 minutes from liftoff, without being conditioned, are going to lose consciousness. They're going to be throwing up. If they don't lose consciousness, right, they're going to get severely sick from that. And there's lots of documentation on that showing the different scales at which you can go. Even when people climb Mount Everest, right, you stop at a certain height and climatize yourself before you climb higher.
Yeah.
And then you're still into oxygen. They're at that level when they drop that vehicle down. Then they go into the spacesuit and drop down to 3 3/4 pounds. Is what they say in the spacesuit.
Yeah.
You can stay alive, but you won't be conscious. And if you're in space and you lose consciousness, you're dead.
Yeah, you are.
Right? Simple as that. There's nobody there to help you. Right? They didn't even climatize themselves to that. They should have had a month before they lifted off, just to be in that capsule so that they know that they wouldn't be having a problem. They'd have to go into a chamber and drop the pressure down gradually and see whether these people are capable, because they'd be sorting out who can go, who can't go, just based on what's going to happen to them in that chamber at that point. But they need to condition themselves.
The same way that deep sea divers, when they have been at great depth under great pressure, they have to come up very slowly so that the body is acclimatized to it, and the gases inside the body, in the blood, don't expand too much. Otherwise you get what's called the bends, which can be lethal. It can kill you. So the same would happen in reverse. You've got to be able to do it gradually. But they don't do this. It's not seen in any way that they are doing any of the actions that would be expected. And none of the academics who claim to know about these things, these professors of physics, these doctors of science, they don't talk about it.
They don't, because it's an error in the entire story, and they can't correct it. These people were out there doing a media show.
That's good. I like that. Yeah, a media show.
They were doing a big media show. They had to impress the pants off of the entire world, so they built the biggest rocket they could to put on the biggest show. And it had to work. The pressure they were under to get that thing to get off the ground without blowing up. I mean, it only had to go for 4 or 5 minutes, and then it can go crash in the Atlantic. It didn't have to go any farther than that, as long as it was out of sight. Right? That's all it had to do. And they had to do it 6 times. Well, they did it 7, but one of them had a problem. Right? But that was the biggest part of it. Everything else was an afterthought. And a lot of stuff is missed. A lot of stuff that should have been in their preparation and story is not there.
And one area that is seriously omitted from this whole Apollo saga is the story of the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, the MOL. Because there were astronauts going to be on that. This is to replace the spy planes that got shot down over Russia. And they were going to have a manned orbiting laboratory, i.e. a space station. And the people who were going to operate it were going to be astronauts, obviously, because if you are going to be as high as they were supposed to be, 100 miles up or so, they had to be trained as astronauts. And they trained alongside the Apollo astronauts initially. And their names are known, but not particularly well known. It's very hard to find out much about the manned orbiting laboratory. It was cancelled in 1968 because they found that they could do it without astronauts on board. They could use just ordinary remote-controlled satellites. And hence the Hexagon spy satellite was sent up in 1971. It was built in 1969. And that operated without astronauts on board. But the key to this, and this is where the whole Apollo story blows apart, the Hexagon spy satellite had to keep its film, which used film, this stuff, guys, film, it had to be pressurized. It's well documented. But that wasn't released, it was classified, obviously, wasn't declassified until 2011. And it was only about 3 or 4 years after that when I attended a talk given by the designer of the camera equipment on board the Hexagon spy satellite, where he said the film had to be kept under a small amount of pressure. And I asked him the question, would the same apply to Apollo? Of course it would, he said. So forget Apollo and photographs on the moon, that never happened. They were photographs on their training set, probably Hangar 1 at Menlo Park.
Well, the funny thing that got me is when I was looking up the different types of film, and not that I know anything about film, that's your expertise, but the S-star film that was being used, right? Kodak also produced what they call a high-altitude film, up to 20,000 feet. Why wasn't it used?
Well, to 20,000 feet, it's not really that high, is it?
Well, the S-star film can work at a lower pressure. Why isn't it the high-altitude film?
Oh, but what they used was the special film. They had this special film, we're told. And that's how they got all these wonderful photographs. The only special bit about the photographic film was that the base was thin, so it would fit into the camera. You get 200 photographs into one roll of film. That was the only thing that was changed. There's nothing special about it at all.
The thinner it is, the quicker it's going to come apart in a vacuum.
Oh, yeah, well, yes, but I mean, don't worry about that because they've got this special film. And the parrots can parrot it. Parrot, parrot, parrot. Special film, parrot, parrot.
They don't know anything about film either, then.
No, they don't. And they claim that I don't. Ha!
If this film was special and could work in such an environment, then why did it not become the new high-altitude film?
Yes, and why didn't Kodak promote it as one of their best products?
If you develop a new, specialized, and superior material, it ultimately is going to go into the commercial market.
Yeah, of course it will.
Okay, but nothing that NASA produced that they claim got them to the moon has ever come into the commercial market. The amount of power and energy they can get from a battery never transferred. None of their computer stuff was transferred. It was completely obsolete at the time, and two guys hiring a kite, you know, Wozniak and Steve Jobs, built a freaking computer, right?
They did.
Why the hell weren't they working for NASA? Because those are the guys that knew how to do it. We don't even see NASA in association with IBM producing anything, right? Not even printers or anything like that, right? They didn't do any of it. None of the technology that they claim they had transferred out.
Yeah, it didn't. It didn't.
Okay? None of the insulation they claim to have around their fuel cells. Like when they claim that their little thin layer of insulation, that you could take something that's at 0 Fahrenheit, put it in a tank, and leave it for 10 years, and the contents inside of there would only come up 1 degree when it's sitting in room temperature. That's what they claim how good their insulation is. Why the hell are we not using that in our houses?
Because it didn't work the first time.
I've never seen anything except the document claiming how well it worked.
Yeah, because they were told to, and they had to parrot it. They had to say all these things.
But that should have been on the commercial market. The stuff they were using on the command module as far as glass, I mean, we would have had bulletproof limousines with little tiny thin glass on the bloody things instead of this stuff that's 3 and 4 inches thick that we still have to use today, or 12 or 14 inches thick if you're in a jail, if you've ever seen the glass inside a jail. It's just unbelievable. The stuff that was in Building 7 was well over a foot thick, right? Because it was designed to take a nuclear blast.
Yeah.
Like that was the alternate command station in case the Pentagon got hit, right? Why isn't it that if they don't have it even for government use, and it's not for commercial use, then how did this little 3/8 of an inch thick glass work?